If you'd care to follow along, the reading this morning will be taken from the Old Testament, from the book of Isaiah, chapter 62, reading verses 1 through 8. Isaiah 62, 1 through 8. For Zion's sake, I will not keep silent. For Jerusalem's sake, I will not remain quiet, till her righteousness shines out like the dawn, her salvation like a blazing torch. The nations will see your righteousness, and all kings your glory. You will be called by a new name that the mouth of the Lord will bestow. You will be a crown of splendor in the Lord's hand, a royal diadem in the hand of your God. No longer will they call you deserted, or name your land desolate, but you will be called Hephzibah, and your land Beulah. For the Lord will take delight in you, and your land will be married. As a young man marries a maiden, so will your sons marry you. As a bridegroom rejoices over his bride, so will your God rejoice over you. I have posted watchmen on your walls, O Jerusalem. They will never be silent day or night. You who call on the Lord, give yourselves no rest, and give him no rest till he establishes Jerusalem and makes her the praise of the earth. The Lord has sworn by his right hand and by his mighty arm, never again will I give your grain as food for your enemies, and never again will foreigners drink the new wine for which you have toiled.
I know everybody's already done this, but I will do it again. Happy New Year. It's interesting how, of all the times of the calendar, the transition from December 31st to January 1st has just get so much attention. I was kind of amused. You may have seen it in the news. A couple down in the States gave birth to twins, one born before midnight, one born after. And so you think about the confusion now, one child born 1 year, the other child born the other, and they're twins. So that will be kind of an interesting thing. We have, financially, our tax year begins. So many things happen, when the year changes. And yet, probably, for most of us, doesn't really seem like much has changed. I thought about posting on Facebook. I kind of resisted kind of going back to the poem the night before Christmas, just to borrow a part of a line from there. And I just wanted to say, Happy New Year to all, and to all a good night. Because it just, we had a New Year's Eve party here at the building, and I've never seen a New Year's Eve party fizzle at 10:30. We had about half our, several people came with little kids, so they needed to get them home. But I was just kind of thinking, I can remember, we were just going strong at midnight, and I think for most of us is how quickly can we get out of here, get to bed. But we don't want to start the year exhausted. We want to start the year with a new frame of mind. And I thought this passage in Isaiah 62 would be good as a point to begin with. It's important for us to kind of think as we begin. Paul made a statement in Romans 15:4. Sometimes people kind of wonder, well, why look at the Old Testament? Why talk about history? Why dig back? Well, Paul's statement here is that for everything that was written in the past was written to teach us that through endurance and the encouragement of the Scriptures, we might have hope. And a lot of times, ideas that we find in the New Testament have roots in the Old Testament. And this passage in Isaiah is one of those. Now, Isaiah 62, one of the things you understand when you're looking at Isaiah is really you can't just pull a section of verses out, because Isaiah, didn't stop and say, okay, new chapter here. Sometimes his discourses will run for quite a while. And I want to take a bit of a backup here to the context that he's talking about a low point for Jerusalem and for Zion, which is the mountain of the temple. Things have gotten bad, and the immediate future is not good. He paints a picture back in Isaiah 58 of how distorted worship has become. And if you're familiar with many of the Old Testament prophets, one of the things they had to talk about was how worship had become just empty form. You know, and how people, it was like throwing a bone to God. Like you might throw a bone to a dog. It doesn't really mean anything. You're just going through the motions because it's expected of you. But, you know, the way he puts it is that, you know, this people honors me with their lips, but their heart is far from me. And so Isaiah goes into the next chapter to say that their sins have made a separation between the people and God. And this is an important passage to use sometimes in showing people that this is what sin does. It takes us away from God. It puts a gulf between us. But then in verse 14, there are 4 statements that are really, really kind of interesting, and you might see a parallel. He says, number 1, justice is driven back. Justice, often meaning in the Old Testament, there is a sense of justice being justice for, the punishment of evildoers and reward of the righteous. But also, justice is the care of the poor and the needy, of the widow and the orphan, of the stranger. We talked a few weeks ago about the idea of refugee. So justice is driven back. Righteousness stands at a distance. Now, I understand that the word in each one of these lines is something that God wants. But just kind of think of the picture here, is that because of the way people are living, because of the way that Judah and Jerusalem are, that the things that God most values are being pushed away. So justice, righteousness stands at a distance. Truth has stumbled in the street. And honesty cannot enter. What a picture of Jerusalem. That these things of justice, righteousness, truth, and honesty, not part of their lives. And you can just imagine what that does to God when His people are living so far from what He wants. So chapter 60 begins with the idea that kind of as a result of all of this, darkness covers the earth. It's just such a picture of gloom, disaster, trouble, whatever way you might want to picture it. But it's just a very unpleasant idea. Well, Isaiah doesn't want to leave it as a doom oracle. So he comes to 62, and this is part of what we would think of as a hope oracle. That there is a brighter future for Zion. And in these verses that we read, he begins to paint that picture. We could look at much more, but I think we get to the point here. And so he says, the nations will see your righteousness, and all kings your glory. You will be called by a new name that the mouth of the Lord will bestow. See, the hope oracle, following all the doom and gloom of the previous chapters, is for a very positive future that will show Jerusalem and Judah to the rest of the world as God's people, and what that means. And I don't know if you notice, there's kind of an interesting thing here that refers to the crown of splendor and the royal diadem. Those are things usually you think of putting on your head, kind of a thing. But it says that they are in God's hand. And that suggests that God has that in his hand to place on the head of his servant of Jerusalem. So where all the doom and gloom and where all, righteousness and truth are abandoned, he sees this wonderful future where there's a new name that God will give to his people. This is illustrated with a wedding analogy, and it's kind of an interesting picture here. And kind of as an aside, we'll touch on something in a minute. So it will go from being deserted and desolate. And, the picture we have of deserted and desolate is kind of like a desert, a place that is barren. All right, but this is actually a marriage analogy that he's using. And so it will go from deserted and desolate to delight and married. Delight, Hephzibah, and married, Beulah. Now, you may be thinking back to a song, I think it's in our books. I've reached the land of love divine. There are older versions of it. What is it? Corn and wine? But then the chorus goes, "Oh, Beulah land." And you may have sung that and kind of been scratching your head and wondering, what is this about? Okay, it comes from this verse. Beulah means married. And the picture that Isaiah is using, the Lord will take delight in you. This is the next verse. See the Hephzibah? The Lord will take delight in you. And your land will be married. Wait a minute. How's land got to be married? Well, it's with the new name. God will give a new covenant and relationship with his people that are represented and symbolized by the land. God's going to have a covenant like a marriage covenant. And so God's response, you see that first picture that we saw in the preceding chapters, that there's just such a doom and gloom and such pessimism because everything is just so bad, that instead what's going to happen is God's going to marry his people. That's this new covenant. And love the picture here. As a bridegroom rejoices over his bride, so will your God rejoice over you. Okay, guys, those of you who are married, do you remember that day when you stood at the front and you watched your bride appear at the other end of the aisle in her glory, in her beauty, in her radiance? One of the things about doing weddings, being up here next to the grooms, and when they see their bride coming in the door, whether it's here or our old building or wherever it is, that's one of the things that I just find just absolutely just so amazing, so wonderful. It's to see the smile. In fact, the word smile doesn't even work, does it? The groom just beams with joy at the sight of the bride. And Isaiah's talking about the idea about this restoration, about this new covenant with his people, that it's like a bridegroom rejoicing over his bride. God will rejoice over you. So, New Testament, Jesus tells us there is more joy in heaven over one sinner who repents than over 99 righteous who have no need to repent. The picture of God is, and we're told so many ways. The prodigal son. After the son has rebelled and rejected his father and left home and has lived in a way that just totally rejects everything his father stood for, wastes his inheritance. The father is watching for the son to come home and goes out to greet him. Why? Because of the love of the father. And so whether Isaiah using that image or Jesus using that image, that God is a God of love wanting to welcome his people home, even if it's just one soul. And that with that picture, if you go on here, then you see the gifts of what God bestows to his people. And in addition to the new name and the new covenant, there's a new security, that their crops will never be taken. New blessings. And so for us in Christ, we have, and I just want to go through a list of things here because I think they're just so incredible. If you go through the New Testament and you think about the new that God offers to his people. So, the new name is mentioned in Revelation 2:17. To those who are faithful, I'll give them a new name. A white stone with a new name written on it. Paul says in 2 Corinthians 5, if anyone is Christ, he is a new creation. The old has gone. The new has come. There are so many times that people will say to me as we're talking, as they think about their lives, as they think about all the things that may have been wrong and gone wrong, and all of the hurt, and the things that, from a human standpoint, we think we can never go back and undo, the concept that God offers to those who are coming to him is of becoming a new creature, of having a new beginning. The writer of Hebrews talks about Jesus as a new and living way into the presence of God. Where the old way was so difficult, depended on the intermediacy of priests, who themselves had to offer sacrifices for their sins. Jesus has actually taken us into the presence of God. Paul in Romans 6, speaking about when we're baptized, that we die with Christ and we are raised to walk and live a new life. It's a new beginning that God offers to us through his Son and through his death on the cross. That God is wanting people to come to him away from whatever it is that has mired them and held them down and is maybe even destroying their lives. God is saying through that cross, I'll give you a new beginning. But then that leads to things like a new attitude. It's always interesting to me to think about this because, you probably have met people who've become Christians and maybe there's been a change in some habits, but the attitude hasn't changed. They're still the same old. It's kind of unfortunate, isn't it? But the idea and the importance of a new attitude, a new mind, a new self, both in terms of the idea of having the new life from God, but that being lived out in a new way. How important is that for us? That God, as he offered to the people of Jerusalem and Judah that new covenant, that new name that he would give, And we would understand that with that new covenant is that that would be Christ ultimately. And that he offers that to us. So, as we begin the new year, we might want to ask the question, well, what's new for you? You know, it's interesting to think about the idea that we have an acronym that has been around for a long time. I sometimes say, well, how are you doing? And we say, so-so. Well, so-so is an acronym for same old, same old. So think about this new year. What's new for us? Is it a new relationship with God? I hope so. Maybe you're already a Christian, you have that relationship. Well, maybe that needs to take some new directions, new opportunities, trying new things. You know, we're talking about the dream or vision for this congregation. We had a great discussion last night with the elders and deacons and ministers and our wives. And as we think about what may be a vision, a dream for the future, thinking about new, we're going to identify somebody that's going to be new in taking the role in the pulpit. But there are other new things, new ministries, new programs. You know, there are other opportunities. And hopefully each one of us will identify the fact that I want to be part of God's work in this place. I want to, you know, maybe I haven't been doing much. I want something new. So what's new for you? Glenn's chosen a song for us to close with. And, you know, if you look at the chorus, it talks about, you know, really that attitude that Jesus is everything to me. And everything will always be. And hopefully as we're singing this, if you're a Christian, you will use this as a time to kind of recommit yourself for 2016. If you're not a Christian, we want to encourage you to think about making that decision to follow Jesus, of putting your faith in him and being baptized. And if we can help you with that, you can talk with Chad, me, one of the elders afterwards. Let's stand as we sing.